Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. The movie I want to talk about today comes from 1950. This is Stromboli. It is directed by Roberto Rossellini, and it stars Ingrid Bergman. And I'm working my way through the filmography of Rossellini, at least those that are available on the Criterion channel. Stromboli is available on the Criterion channel and also in the Criterion collection. There's three of the Ingrid Bergman, Roberto Rossellini films. They made a couple more than that. Fear, the fourth film, is also streaming on the Criterion channel, although it is not in the collection. And I'm doing this in concert with my reading of this massive almost 700-page biography, The Adventures of Roberto Rossellini, written by Tag Gallagher. It is one of the best biographies I've ever read. Very entertaining. In fact, I would even venture to say that this biography of Rossellini is more entertaining than Rossellini's films themselves. And I don't think Rossellini would have a problem with me saying that, because one thing he didn't want to do was make entertaining movies. He wanted to make movies that you would think about philosophically, spiritually. Stromboli is the first of the Ingrid Bergman films with Rossellini, and this was at the height of the scandal. It's a pretty interesting story if you don't know it. Ingrid Bergman was probably the biggest female movie star in the world, starting back from Casablanca through Notorious. She was glamorous. She was only 33 years old when she made Stromboli. She had a long-term contract with David Selznick. That contract expired. She did not re-sign. She made a couple independent films that didn't do well. She wasn't satisfied with her work in Hollywood. She wanted to make more important films, so to speak. She had seen Rossellini's war trilogy. I talked about Rome Open City a couple weeks ago. She was much impressed. Instead of going through agents, producers, studios, she wrote a handwritten note to Rossellini saying that how much she would like to appear in one of his films. Now, Rossellini was making movies for next to nothing. They were low-budget movies. They were art films. This was the beginning of neo-realism, where part of its tenets was to use non-professional actors to film on sites, to use stories of average people, and to go out in the streets and shoot on locations, show what life is really like with the lives of people who were not necessarily part of the Hollywood star system, the movies that Hollywood made. So it was an extraordinary, like a bombshell for Rossellini to have an American actress, or she's actually Swedish, but a Hollywood actress, to want to appear in his movies. How would that even work out, one might think? So, of course, he acted on it immediately. They had meetings, and Rossellini, who was a world-class womanizer, a world-class narcissist, he bragged to friends it would only take him 2 weeks to get Ingrid into his bed. And I think it took even less than that, as she was bowled over by Rossellini, bewitched by him, immediately in love. She was married with a child. But now this was going to be a new venture. And so what kind of film could Rossellini possibly come up with? Well, for Ingrid Bergman. So he had passed by a detention center once for women, and he was quite struck by one of the women who was in this detention center. And he went back to find out how she was doing, and he discovered that she had married a fisherman and had moved off to the island of Stromboli, which is off the west coast of Italy, where she was now living. And so this was the genesis of the story that Rossellini developed with his screenwriters. And Ingrid Bergman was going to play this character. So Bergman's character was Lithuanian, and she had evidently lived a fairly well life, sort of upper class, and her husband, I think, is mentioned as being an architect. But then the war came, husband died. She had to collaborate with the invading Nazi army, so it's intimated that she had affairs with the German soldiers. In order to get by, it was a very rough. How would women survive with no family, no husband? And she had to make these compromises in order to survive and have a decent life, at least not live in poverty. So now she's in a detention center for displaced women. And she wants to go to Argentina. One might surmise Argentina might be a welcoming place for her to go, as so many Nazis found their refuge there. But she's denied a visa. So on the other side of the fence of the detention center is Italian soldiers being demobilized, and they talk to the woman through the fence, and the young man who takes a fancy to the Ingrid Bergman character, Karen, they meet. He doesn't speak very good English. She speaks English. So they have developed a friendship, and then he proposes, marry me, and I'll take you back to my hometown. And when the Argentinian possibility fades away, she accepts. And this is what she finds out very quickly is a tragic mistake she has made, because he lives on the island of Stromboli, has been a fisherman. Karen has to endure a bad boat ride to Stromboli. When she gets there, she basically finds a ghost town. Stromboli at that time only had about 500 inhabitants. It had no electricity, no running water. Her husband was a fisherman. They move into the family home. The family is all gone. It's in deteriorating shape. She's looked at as an outsider by the villagers, and it's a village with all kinds of alleyways, and she's constantly getting lost. She rarely comes across another human being. There is a priest there in the town, the village, and he speaks English, and he does befriend her, tries to help her to get through this what she views as a catastrophe. She has to escape this. She cannot live here. And she tells her husband that and he vows to save up enough money so that they can at least go to the mainland and try to get jobs there. She cannot exist in this ghost town. And her alienation is further exasperated by the fact that Stromboli is basically an active volcano. And that volcano is always rumbling, and it's always smoking, and it seems like an imminent disaster is on hand. But she tries to adapt herself to this life, and everything she does makes the rest of the women in the town angry. She's wearing nice dresses. She's decorating her house in a pleasant way for her to endure, because her husband, to endure the time that her husband is away, and he's away quite often. They find her immodest. She has no escape. So as time goes by, she goes to the priest. You've got to help me get out of here. And he intimates that he does have some money, and of course she wants it right away. The priest has some money sent from residents of Stromboli who have gone to America, made well, and send back money to the priest, help somebody out. Well, Karen wants that money, and she has used her sexual attraction previously to get by, and she uses it even on this priest, and she does on another lighthouse, another man in the village who was a lighthouse keeper, just to get away. there are two very memorable sequences in Stromboli. One is the tuna harvest, which her husband participates in, where they go out into the sea, and Karen inexplicably goes out to watch the tuna hunt. And these are giant tunas, and they had, while they were filming it, it took about 8 days before the tuna harvest could take place, and giant tuna. And then as they're being slid open, Karen is just horrified by it, and it's horrified by. It just increases the horror of what her life has become. She can't even find some connection with her husband and seeing at his work. The second episode that is so memorable is the volcano erupts, and the volcano actually erupted in the filming of Stromboli. It's quite a terrific sequence, and Ted Gallagher doesn't really go into how much of this was staged and how much was real, because the villagers, being terrified and their lives at stake, they all rush to the boats and get out into the sea until the eruption calms down. And then we have the ending, and the ending is ambiguous. It can be seen in many different ways, and especially as in a spiritual sense. And I would have to say that Bergman is great in this scene. She is great throughout this film, and I think she's great in all these Rossellini films. Now, when I saw these movies years ago, I didn't like them at all. It's so strange, the strangeness of having Ingrid Bergman in this neo-realist setting, a great Hollywood star. It seems so bizarre, and it really reflects what's going on in the movie, because Karen is also a fish out of water, so to speak, and that she is, what is she doing in this village, and with no prospect of any long-term happiness? And what is Ingrid Bergman doing in a Roberto Rossellini film of this kind? What's amazing is how luminous she is in this film. It's all about Ingrid Bergman in the film. Whatever the philosophical, spiritual elements of the film, it's all related to Ingrid Bergman and her performance. She is giving a performance here. And in all these Rossellini movies, that's what it's all about. This is Rossellini filming Ingrid Bergman, going through whatever she's going through. He is, and she comes through. I mean, she really delivers here, and I was sort of dumbfounded by it. Now, the next film they make together, Euro 51, is an even more spiritual film, in which Bergman is playing a character who blames herself for her son's death, and she wants to live. She's living this wealthy, to her now, meaningless life, and she wants to minister to the sick and to the poor. And it's sort of a continuation of Rossellini's films, The Flowers of St. Francis, which he made, I think, in between the first two Bergman films. So, in which Francis, a monk, sort of like a rogue monk, is trying to lead he and his fellow monks who, in this attempt to live a truly Christian life. Is it even possible? The final movie was Journey to Italy, and this was filmed in English with Bergman and George Sanders, and they play a married couple that bicker all the time with each other, and then there's sort of a miracle at the end. This is the Journey to Italy is the film that the French New Wave critics adopted as one of the greatest films of all time. And then Rossellini was leading cinema into a whole new area of expression, and especially Eric Romer. Romer was probably the most bowled over by Journey to Italy, and a film that he and this this style of Rossellini, I think he probably developed it better than, and more true to this neo-realist style in his filmography. Jacques Rivette, also a big fan of Journey to Italy. In fact, all of the New Wave critics rallied around the film Journey to Italy because it got a terrible reception. The reception for Stromboli was also terrible. What was Ingrid Bergman doing in this film? It was dull. It was there's no attempt to entertain an audience. It's philosophical. Rossellini is trying to get to a truth both cinematically and philosophically. But for the audiences, for the critics of the time, outside of the French New Wave critics, they didn't understand what this truth was. And I think Rossellini, if there's a weakness in Rossellini, is he is somewhat obscure in divulging to his audience exactly what this truth is. He believed he was reinventing cinema, and certainly in a way he was in this neo-realist approach. In Italy, the film was a big flop. Bergman, they soldiered on, however, in future films. These other two films that I mentioned, and also a movie that they made in Germany called Fear, a really puzzler of a movie. And then I think they filmed a stage production they had together called Joan at the Stake. So I mentioned the influence of Rossellini on the French New Wave critics. Did he reinvent movies? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say. Spiritually, the ending is so ambiguous in Stromboli, but spiritually, certainly he had his moments in his films. In 1960, he made a film called General del Rovere, which was a big hit, and he was actually sort of embarrassed that it was a big hit. It was another war movie. It starred Vittorio De Sica. Same time, it was the same year as La Dolce Vita and La Ventura. Now, Fellini had been a good friend, a screenwriter on Rossellini's films. Rossellini did not like Fellini's films, the direction that Fellini was going into, a sort of inward kind of narcissistic kind of films, and Fellini was miffed by it, you know. And Antonioni, though, you could see a resemblance in Antonioni's movies, especially La Ventura, with all the camera following Monica Vitti around and Gabriel Ferzetti as well. The camera follows them around as they visit sites throughout Sicily as they search for the lost Anna. The difference being is that in Rossellini there is a God. in Antonioni there is no God. There is no God to be found. There is no a moment of spiritual epiphany. And what is his influence on modern filmmakers? Did he reinvent filmmaking? What would be the influence today? Rossellini is rarely talked about much anymore. Certainly there are slow cinema. I can't remember the Turkish director who makes very long, slow cinema movies that you might say harken back to Rossellini. Maybe Kelly Reichardt. There's touches of Rossellini influence there. And in film festival directors in general, perhaps so. But they lack the spirituality, to be sure, that Rossellini does bring to his films. And Rossellini is an interesting character. As I said, a world-class womanizer, narcissist. And sometimes, and when I'm reading this book, even though Tad Gallagher goes into great detail, especially on Stromboli and Journey into Italy, to try to get us to see what Rossellini is doing, to try to get us to see what the truth is that he is discovering and that he wants people to follow, to change their whole life. Well, I don't think that ever actually occurred. but these, and especially the war movies and the Ingrid Bergman movies are really well worth a visit. Now I'll mention Michael Bartlett, who is very much a Rossellinian, and he made a video on Rossellini that was much greater depth than I would go into, and much greater consideration. I think he even ranks the films 1 to 10. I'll leave a link to that video because it's well worth seeing if you have an interest in going forward with watching the films of Roberto Rossellini. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.